Yeah.
What you think about that?
He didn't do it.
Fuck out of here. All the evidence that's out there.
Just like that, Charleston White dropped a bombshell, declaring David innocent and backing it up with proof nobody expected. The evidence he revealed flipped the case upside down and had everyone questioning what they thought they knew. When the story first broke that a dismembered body was found inside a Tesla registered to rising music star David, the internet exploded. Accusations, wild theories, and outrage spread like wildfire. Headlines rushed to paint him as guilty before a trial was even in sight, while fans debated whether his dark lyrics were secret confessions. Big brands panicked and cut ties, desperate to save their own image. But right in the middle of the chaos, one voice cut through the noise louder than anyone else. Charleston White, brash, controversial, and unfiltered, came forward and said what nobody else had the guts to say. He didn't hesitate, he didn't stutter. He flat out declared David wasn't guilty, and he wasn't just talking. He doubled down on it. Charleston stunned the crowd by saying the lack of an arrest was the clearest proof of David's innocence. He pointed out that in America, especially for young black men, people get locked up every day on far less evidence. They'll throw you in jail just to hold you, Charleston argued. If cops had anything solid on David, he said, he'd already be behind bars. To Charleston, the absence of charges wasn't proof investigators were building some big case. It meant they didn't have a case at all. He made his point with one of his raw, streetwise analogies, the kind that hits hard, makes people uncomfortable, but forces them to think. And that's where Charleston's message landed. He reminded everyone that if it was an average person tied to a body like this, they'd already be sitting in a cell. The fact that David was still on tour, still free, still moving around in public, to Charleston, that screamed louder than any rumor ever could. But Charleston didn't stop there. He went straight at the nastiest accusations. Claims that David was linked to an underage girl's tragic death. Social media was drowning in speculation. Matching tattoos, leaked photos, even song lyrics fans swore were confessions. It was all too much, too convenient. Charleston ripped that narrative apart, calling it a setup so perfect it felt manufactured. Charleston White made it crystal clear. The story just didn't add up. Think about it. A young black artist allegedly tied to a missing 15-year-old girl with supposed physical evidence connecting him to her death, and yet no detainment, no charges, not even a temporary hold. To Charleston, that silence from law enforcement wasn't negligence. It was the biggest clue of all. Maybe David wasn't the villain the world was so quick to paint him as. And in true Charleston fashion, he didn't hold back from making his audience squirm. He forced people to face the reality of how the body was discovered, dismembered, hidden, brutalized. He argued that the crime looked like something far more planned, far more cold-blooded than what David was even capable of. He pushed viewers to ask the question nobody wanted to. What if this was a setup? What if someone else entirely was responsible? They got all this evidence to point to say he did it. He done sliced the body up because the body was butchered and still no arrest, Charleston shouted. Those words ripped through X, YouTube, and Instagram, sparking a firestorm. Half the internet blasted him for defending the indefensible, accusing him of protecting a man whose car contained a teenager's remains. But the other half, they admitted Charleston was the only one bold enough to say what they'd been secretly wondering. Maybe the story wasn't so simple. Charleston didn't just drop a hot take and disappear. He stuck with the case, hammering his point home again and again. To him, it wasn't just suspicious that David hadn't been arrested. It was impossible to swallow the story as it was being told. Then he hit his audience with a jaw-dropping comparison, the O.J. Simpson trial. By invoking one of the most infamous cases in American history, Charleston wasn't just name-dropping. He was highlighting what he saw as blatant hypocrisy in how the justice system picks and chooses who to throw behind bars. If police were quick to jail OJ on circumstantial evidence, why hadn't they done the same with David, who supposedly had far stronger evidence stacked against him? And Charleston didn't stop there. He took it even darker, spinning out scenarios where someone else could be behind the gruesome act. The more he spoke, the clearer it became. Charleston wasn't buying the official narrative at all. These weren't polished courtroom arguments, they were raw bombs tossed into the public square, messy, blunt, and impossible to ignore. And that's exactly why Charleston's voice carried so far. He wasn't bound by courtroom rules or careful legal talk. He spoke the way regular people argue. Emotional, direct, and unfiltered. In his eyes, the case against David just didn't make sense. Charleston even mocked the so-called evidence that fans had clung to online. The matching tattoos, photos of David and the 15-year-old victim supposedly sharing the same tattoo on their index fingers had gone viral, with people swearing it was proof of intimacy. But Charleston wasn't buying it. To him, a tattoo was nothing more than ink, and the fact that something so flimsy was being twisted into headlines only showed how desperate people were to paint David guilty. Then came the line that lit social media on fire. The moment Charleston turned his criticism toward the girl herself, words that many found deeply offensive, but that revealed exactly where his mind was. He wasn't holding back, even if it meant making people furious. That statement dropped like dynamite. Critics accused him of victim blaming, of tearing down a teenager who could no longer defend herself just to shield David. But Charleston's defenders pushed back. They argued he wasn't excusing anything. He was flipping the script, forcing people to question whether the story being told was too neat, too one-sided. To Charleston, asking uncomfortable questions was better than blindly swallowing the narrative. And once again, he leaned hard into the racial angle. Over and over, he reminded his audience, they don't let black men get away with these kinds of crimes. Not in America. That line echoed everywhere. For Charleston, it was the ultimate logic. If a young black man had really done something this horrific, he wouldn't be free. The fact that David was still walking around uncharged meant something deeper was at play. While the internet obsessed over tattoos, leaked photos, and lyrics, Charleston zoomed out to the bigger picture: race, power, and how the system operates when the cameras are rolling. By this stage, Charleston wasn't just poking holes in the case. He was ripping it apart piece by piece and daring anyone to prove him wrong. His words carried the weight of someone who had studied injustice his entire life. To Charleston, this wasn't just about one rapper. It was about a system that had never been fair.
So I'm saying, let me think outside the box. Maybe his mama done it. Maybe her mama done it and set him up. Maybe one of them racist uncles or cousins don't like her. Maybe the other boyfriend done it. Maybe the pimp who was sex trafficking her for the last year when she ran away done it.
To black men suddenly acting too fair in a case that seemed tailor-made for a quick conviction, it was a paradox, one Charleston wasn't afraid to shout about. A body discovered in a Tesla registered to David, allegations of a relationship with a minor, lyrics that sounded more like confessions than songs. To most people, all of this screamed guilt. But Charleston White looked at the same facts and flipped them upside down. To him, they were proof of innocence. Because if David was truly guilty, Charleston argued, the system wouldn't hesitate to lock him up. It was a strange, almost twisted kind of defense. Charleston didn't deny the evidence existed. He claimed there was too much evidence, so much stacked up that the very weight of it made the lack of an arrest suspicious. To him, that contradiction demanded answers. Then he went further, daring to ask the questions no one else wanted to touch. What if this wasn't David's crime at all? What if it was a setup? A frame job that looked airtight on the surface but was actually full of cracks once you pulled it apart. Those what-ifs turned Charleston's commentary into a viral firestorm. Some dismissed him as reckless and irresponsible, but others, they couldn't help but nod along, because setups and cover-ups in the celebrity world weren't exactly unheard of. Charleston knew how to keep that tension alive. He circled back again and again to one point that couldn't be ignored. David was still free. He reminded people of the darkest claim online. They're saying he was dating a 13-year-old girl and now she's dead. So you mean to tell me all this evidence exists and police still haven't arrested him? For Charleston, the answer was simple. They hadn't arrested him because he didn't do it. That was the hill he stood on, no matter how much backlash it brought. Critics accused him of downplaying the death of a child, of excusing behavior that never should be excused. But Charleston thrived on outrage. He wasn't backing down. While social media tore itself apart over whether he was a truth teller or just trolling, Charleston doubled down harder than ever. He told audiences to think about all the cases they'd seen. Young black men dragged into courtrooms on rumors, locked up on maybes and probablys. And yet here was David, surrounded by supposed DNA, tattoos, lyrics, a car with a body inside, and still no arrest? To Charleston, that wasn't coincidence. That was innocence. And for millions watching, those words hit like a shockwave. People stopped, replayed, and asked themselves, what if Charleston wasn't completely wrong? But Charleston White's defense of David didn't just explode out of nowhere. To understand why his words went viral, why his outlandish claims stirred millions of comments, and why people even listened in the first place, you have to understand the man himself. Because Charleston White isn't just another commentator with a microphone. He's a whole controversy machine built to keep the world watching. He's a man built on pure controversy, a walking contradiction of crime, redemption, hypocrisy, and spectacle all rolled into one. Charleston White's life story isn't just messy, it's explosive. Born in Texas in 1977, Charleston's world spun out of control early. By just 14 years old, his life took a violent, irreversible turn. Outside a Foot Locker, he was caught in a fatal altercation that left a man dead. Tried as an adult, convicted of murder, and locked up until age 21, Charleston walked out of prison already carrying a permanent stain on his name. For his critics, that's proof he has no moral ground to stand on. But for Charleston, it became the foundation of his entire persona. A past mistake turned into fuel for the outspoken mission he now lives by. After prison, Charleston tried to reinvent himself. He even became a community activist, founding an organization called HOPI, Hypocrisy Over Politics, aimed at steering kids away from gangs and crime. For a moment, it looked like he might actually stay on the path of redemption, using his scars to warn the next generation. But Charleston was never built for quiet reform. His energy, his fire, his hunger to provoke, it all pulled him back into the spotlight, not as a saint, but as a lightning rod. By the 2020s, he was infamous for his unfiltered honesty, calling out anyone in his way, rappers, politicians, even entire communities. T.I., Boozy Badazz, countless others, Charleston didn't just critique them, he went for their families, their parenting, even their reputations. Every insult went viral. Every feud brought him more followers. And every time he did it, people asked the same burning question. Is Charleston White a truth teller or just a clout chaser who'll say anything for attention? Look at his feud with streamer Aiden Ross. In 2023, Charleston pepper sprayed one of Ross's associates live on camera. Chaos instantly erupted, legal threats flew, and his name was everywhere. That single act summed him up perfectly. Volatile, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. And it didn't stop there. At a comedy show, instead of calming hecklers, Charleston pulled out stacks of cash and waved them in their faces, mocking them as the crowd gasped. To some, it was comedy. To others, proof he wasn't a reformed activist at all, just a showman addicted to outrage. That's why people keep listening to him, because Charleston doesn't just talk, he lives contradiction. One minute he's condemning gang culture and preaching accountability. The next, he's mocking victims, laughing at tragedies, and spitting on sacred lines nobody else dares cross. In September 2025, he went viral again after cursing out the family of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk following his death, dismissing it as just white-on-white crime while laughing. The outrage was immediate, but Charleston thrived on it, proving once again he was addicted to scandal.
So you mean to tell me OJ was found with a bloody glove, he was arrested immediately? Immediately, with all the circumstantial evidence they found on OJ, they placed it. So you mean to tell me they got all of this on this and he still get to move freely amongst the...
That moment showed the true duality of Charleston White. Part social critic, part troll, and pure chaos rolled into one. When Charleston speaks, people tune in for two reasons. Either they think he's exposing hard truths no one else dares to say, or they're waiting for him to trip up and contradict himself. Either way, his words travel fast. And that's why his voice mattered so much when he aimed it at David's case. Charleston doesn't exist in a vacuum. He lives right in the center of controversy. And this time, his target wasn't a rapper he was beefing with or a politician he despised. It was the system itself and his bold claim that David was innocent. By the time Charleston threw his weight behind that defense, his reputation was already stacked with scandals, viral meltdowns, and explosive hot takes. He wasn't stepping into the storm. He was the storm. His entry into David's case only added thunder to an already chaotic mess. Back in early 2024, Charleston had already proven he had no respect for sacred ground. He mocked the tragic deaths of Chicago's King Von and Houston's Takeoff, laughing and dismissing their legacies as just the natural end of street life. Clips of his commentary spread like wildfire, cementing him as someone who didn't care about boundaries. That was the moment Charleston stopped being seen as a reformed activist and became a professional antagonist. Then came his ugly feud with Boozy Badazz. Charleston openly blasted Boozy's parenting, claiming his choices were steering his kids straight into the same chaos he once lived. It wasn't just an insult, it was a direct attack on Boozy's family. And when Boozy fired back, Charleston escalated, hurling threats that blurred the line between jokes and real violence. To Charleston, it was just keeping it real. To his critics, it was harassment. Even law enforcement couldn't dodge his wrath. Charleston mocked entire police departments, insulted police chiefs, and once even bragged that he'd shoot any cop who tried him. The contradictions piled higher and higher. Here was a man preaching against gang violence while simultaneously glorifying confrontation and armed defiance, and yet the madness only made him bigger. Every feud, every insult, every shocking statement, it all boosted his profile. By 2025, Charleston wasn't seen as an activist anymore. He was a one-man media circus. Whether it was brandishing guns on Instagram Live or clowning rappers during interviews, Charleston figured out the formula: controversy sells. So when he finally spoke up on David's case, critics rolled their eyes. They swore Charleston wasn't chasing truth, he was chasing clout. After all, what bigger headline could a provocateur grab than a teenage star accused of murder? But here's the paradox. The louder people accused him of chasing clout, the more viral his words went. And suddenly, Charleston White's take on David wasn't just background noise, it was center stage. Charleston's defense of David wasn't whispered behind closed doors. It was blasted across YouTube, TikTok, and X for millions to see, debate, and fight over. One clip alone, ripped from its full context, racked up millions of views. Some mocked him, others stitched the video in agreement, and thousands of comments poured in saying the same thing. I don't like Charleston, but he's not lying. That's the twisted power of Charleston White. Even his haters couldn't look away. His credibility was constantly under fire, yet his influence only kept growing. The more people tried to dismiss him, the more traction he gained. And that's why when Charleston positioned himself as David's unlikely defender, the entire internet stopped scrolling. This wasn't just commentary on a news story, it was personal. For Charleston, David wasn't just another headline. He became a symbol, a mirror of Charleston's own troubled youth.
So think about this. If they got all this information on him dating a minor, an underage kid, and she looked like a white girl, mixed girl, what they let just stay free like?
Maybe even a chance for Charleston to rewrite his own history through someone else's trial. Charleston had spent decades preaching that America is quick to cage young black men without a shred of hard proof, and he knew that pain firsthand. At 14, he was locked away, branded by a prison sentence that scarred him for life. That teenage mistake shaped how he saw every arrest, every headline, every accusation. So when he looked at David, he didn't just see a rising artist, he saw the same trap he once fell into. Only this time, the system hadn't pulled the trigger yet. Charleston said it plain. They don't let black men get away with these kinds of crimes, not in America. To him, those weren't just hot words for clicks. They were a confession. He believed that if the evidence against David was truly airtight, the system would have thrown him behind bars already, just like it did to him. The fact that David was still free, to Charleston, that meant innocence. But beneath all the theatrics, there was something deeper. David, like Charleston decades ago, was a young black man caught in the crosshairs of a narrative he couldn't control. Guilty or not, the court of public opinion had already branded him. And Charleston knew that pain too well. That was the twisted irony. The same man who mocked dead rappers, laughed at victims, and thrived on stirring chaos was now standing in front of millions, painting himself as a guardian of justice for a star the world was ready to crucify. Whether you believed him or not, Charleston White made the story impossible to look away from. Because in the end, he wasn't just defending David, he was defending himself. Charleston wasn't just defending David. He was defending his own life story, his survival, and his core belief that the system never plays fair. And as his fiery defense exploded across social media, the case itself kept twisting, with new leaks, speculation, and chilling updates adding even more mystery. The latest development was grim. Authorities confirmed the body found in David's Tesla did belong to the missing 15-year-old girl who had shocked the community with her disappearance. The details were horrifying. Her remains were dismembered, hidden in the trunk, with clear signs of deliberate concealment. For the public, this looked like a smoking gun. Yet law enforcement stayed tight-lipped. Pressed for answers, officials repeated the same cold line again and again: no arrests have been made at this time. That phrase turned into a mantra, echoed across headlines, broadcasts, and police briefings. And while officials said little, the internet went wild. TikTok sleuths dissected David's lyrics, treating tracks like Romantic Homicide as if they were diary entries. Fans broke down his music videos frame by frame, pointing out imagery they swore was linked to the crime. Others compared tour dates with the victim's disappearance, searching for overlaps that might prove the theory true. But for all the noise, nothing concrete surfaced. No DNA reports, no confirmed eyewitnesses, no digital trail tying David directly to her death. Just speculation, whispers, and a mountain of circumstantial clues feeding an endless online frenzy. Behind the scenes, though, detectives were grinding. Digital records, phone pings, hidden communications, all being pieced together. Investigators worked with interstate agencies since both the car and body had allegedly crossed state lines. Every new leak hinted at something bigger boiling under the surface. And this is exactly where Charleston's commentary became dangerous. By boldly declaring David innocent, he wasn't just defending the artist, he was shaping the narrative itself. Millions of David's fans and even casual viewers began echoing Charleston's words. Soon hashtags like #FreeDavid and #Charleston said it trended across X. That's the strange power of viral commentary. It doesn't just react to news, it rewrites it. And in David's case, Charleston White had made himself the loudest pen on the page. His voice wasn't just bouncing inside his own social media bubble anymore. It was spilling into the mainstream. News outlets that once covered the case strictly from an investigative lens were suddenly forced to grapple with Charleston's narrative. His words had gone from controversial clips to unavoidable headlines, twisting the conversation into something far bigger than anyone expected. Suddenly, journalists weren't just covering David's case. They were forced to write about Charleston White, a man with no badge, no law degree, but a megaphone too loud to ignore. Opinion columns flooded in overnight. Some branded him reckless, accusing him of sabotaging a sensitive investigation by screaming innocent without hard evidence. Others, though, admitted grudgingly that his argument about the lack of an arrest wasn't entirely baseless. Whether they hated him or respected him, one thing was clear: Charleston had dragged the case into a brighter, messier spotlight. Meanwhile, fans split into all-out war. On one side, David's supporters, many of them young, loyal, and clinging to Charleston's words like gospel. They stitched his clips, quoted his analogies, and repeated his mantra: he'd be locked up already. On the other side, critics blasted Charleston's defense as a slap in the face to the victim and her grieving family. Arguments turned vicious, with some users even doxing each other over their stances. What should have been a solemn investigation turned into the internet's bloodiest new battlefield. And it wasn't just fans fighting. Brands were watching too. Companies that had quietly stepped back from David after the Tesla scandal now found themselves stuck in limbo. Do they cut ties for good and risk alienating his millions of supporters? Or do they hold off, worried that Charleston might be right and that David could eventually be cleared? The uncertainty froze endorsements in place. David's image hung in the balance. Not fully destroyed, but nowhere near repaired. Law enforcement, however, wasn't swayed by hashtags or trending clips. They rarely named Charleston directly, but subtle pushbacks began to leak out. Sources close to the investigation claimed police were still digging, combing through hours of surveillance footage, online messages, and witness testimonies. The absence of an arrest, they said, wasn't proof of innocence. It was prosecutors taking their time, making sure charges stuck when they finally came. But that quiet resistance only poured gasoline on Charleston's fire. Every vague press release, every no comment, every delay became proof to him that the system had nothing. He seized on the silence, flipping it into ammunition. In his eyes, investigators weren't carefully building a case. They were stalling because there was no case. And the longer that stall dragged on, the louder Charleston's voice grew, echoing across millions of feeds, shaping a narrative the authorities could no longer control. It was the question no one could answer, and that silence, mixed with Charleston White's relentless commentary, kept reshaping public opinion day after day. What began as a murder investigation had spiraled into a cultural storm. It wasn't just about one crime anymore. It was about race, justice, fame, and who gets to decide guilt in the age of viral content. And at the center of it all wasn't a prosecutor or a police chief. It was Charleston White. As weeks turned into months, the David case stopped being a straightforward investigation and became something much bigger. A mirror reflecting how society consumes crime, celebrity, and chaos in the digital era. And in that mirror, Charleston shined brightest, louder than the police, bolder than the lawyers, and more viral than the journalists still clinging to the facts. The official investigation moved forward in its slow, methodical way. Detectives pieced together digital trails, worked with federal agencies, and quietly followed leads across state lines. But while the system worked in the shadows, David's fans clung to Charleston's voice like a lifeline. In a moment when the world seemed ready to bury their idol, Charleston gave them permission to believe in him again. His arguments, is flawed or not, gave supporters a script to push back against the headlines. And in today's online world, sometimes the narrative matters even more than the facts. Fans, critics, and the media all found themselves trapped in the same waiting game, waiting for a charge, waiting for an arrest, waiting for clarity. And in that space of uncertainty, Charleston thrived. The longer nothing happened, the stronger his words sounded. The truth of this case isn't settled. The investigation isn't over. But one thing is undeniable. Charleston White didn't just jump into the story, he hijacked it. He rewrote its rhythm. He made David's innocence as loud a conversation as the crime itself. He turned speculation into debate, debate into content, and content into raw influence. For David, the consequences are still unfolding. His career now hangs in limbo, balanced between a loyal fan base and an industry that doesn't know whether to stand by him or walk away. For law enforcement, the stakes couldn't be higher. If they move forward without airtight evidence, Charleston's words will come back to haunt them. And for the public, this case is a reminder of how quickly truth can get tangled in clicks, clips, and viral commentary. What do you think about Charleston White's shocking defense of David? Do you believe him, or is he just stirring chaos? Drop your thoughts in the comments, smash that like button, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe for more wild breakdowns like this. See you on the next one.